Another perfume in my wife's car. I swapped it for vinegar, and she used it at the business dinner. It was an ordinary Thursday in October when my life changed completely. I had left the office early to pick up some documents I'd forgotten at home. Nicole, my wife of 12 years, was working late, as she always did on Thursdays. Or so she told me. When I pulled into the garage, I noticed her car was parked differently than usual. Nicole was meticulous about these things, always aligning the vehicle perfectly with the marks I'd made on the ground when we moved in. But that day, the silver sedan was askew, as if it had been parked in a hurry. I needed to get a portable charger I'd left in the glove compartment of her car the week before. I opened the driver's door and immediately noticed something strange, a scent that didn't belong there. It wasn't the soft floral perfume Nicole had worn since we met. It was something woody, strong, definitely masculine. My stomach churned. I sat in the driver's seat and took a deep breath, trying to process this discovery. The scent was permeated by the upholstery, the steering wheel, even the rear-view mirror. I began rummaging through the car with trembling hands. In the center console, among coins and candy wrappers, I found what I'd been looking for without realizing it. A small bottle of men's perfume, the kind you get in samples in stores. I held the bottle up to the light. It was still half full. The brand was expensive, the kind I'd never buy. A perfume for a man who cares too much about his appearance, I thought bitterly. I turned the small bottle between my fingers, feeling the weight of betrayal in my hands. Nicole and I met in college. She was studying architecture while I was majoring in business administration. It was love at first sight, the kind people say no longer exists. We built a life together, brick by brick. We bought our house, lovingly furnished, each room, and planted a garden. We talked about having children, but always put it off until next year, when we were more financially stable. Now, sitting in that car that still reeked of betrayal, I wondered when it had all started to fall apart. Was it the long hours at the office? The arguments about money? The routine that turned our romantic dinners into silent meals in front of the television? I took the bottle home and stared at it for hours. I could confront Nicole, scream, cry, demand explanations. I could throw her clothes out the window like in the movies. I could call a lawyer immediately. But something inside me wanted more. I wanted her to feel, even if only for a moment, the unpleasant surprise I was feeling. That's when the idea came to me. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the bottle of white vinegar we used for cleaning. With surgeon-like care, I opened the perfume bottle. The cloying aroma assaulted my nostrils, reassuring me that I wasn't just paranoid. I emptied the contents into the sink, rinsing it afterwards to eliminate any trace. Then, using a small funnel I found in the drawer, I filled the bottle with pure vinegar. My hands no longer trembled. There was a strange calm in my movements, as if I were performing a ritual of poetic justice. I carefully closed the bottle, wiped away any spills, and dried it completely. It needed to look pristine. I returned to the car and placed the bottle exactly where I had found it. The sun was already setting by the time I finished. Nicole would be arriving in a few hours. I prepared dinner as usual, set the table, and opened a bottle of wine. When she arrived, she kissed my cheek absently and said she was tired. "How was work?" I asked, serving the pasta I'd prepared. "Oh, you know, the same old thing. Endless meetings, impossible deadlines." She picked at her plate, without much appetite. I watched her every gesture during dinner, the way she avoided my gaze, the way she constantly checked her phone, the way she smiled at the screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. How could I have been so blind? The following days were a torture of anticipation. I went to work, came back, we ate dinner, we slept. Nicole continued her overtime on Thursdays. I continued to pretend to believe. The bottle remained in the console of the car, a little time bomb waiting to explode. It was the following Tuesday that it happened. I was at the office when my phone rang. It was Nicole, and she was furious. I couldn't fully understand what she was saying between her screams. Something about a ruined dinner, about embarrassment, about a horrible smell. I asked her to calm down and explain what had happened. "That perfume you gave me," she yelled, and I almost laughed at the irony. "I wore it to dinner with the firm's clients today, and it smelled like vinegar. Vinegar, can you believe it? Everyone looked at me strangely. It was humiliating. I was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. So she had assumed the perfume was a gift from me? And she wore it to a business dinner? This was even better than I had planned. Perfume? I didn't give you any perfume, Nicole. How could it be? It was in my car. That little bottle, I thought. It was you. Nicole, I haven't given you surprise gifts in years. You know that. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, trying to find a plausible explanation. It must have been some gift, maybe. From some supplier, she stammered. Men's perfume? What? You said you used the perfume. Was it men's or women's? More silence. When she finally answered, her voice was weak, barely audible. I have to go. We'll talk at home. But we didn't talk that night. Nicole arrived late, saying she had to resolve the misunderstanding with the clients. She went straight to the shower and then to bed, claiming a headache. I stayed in the living room, drinking whiskey and thinking about what would come next. The days turned into weeks. Nicole stopped working overtime on Thursdays. He started coming home early, preparing elaborate dinners, and suggesting weekend getaways for the couple. It was as if he was trying to make up for something, but we never brought up the perfume. I could have left things at that. I could have accepted this silent attempt at reconciliation. But doubt gnawed at me. Who was he? How long had it been happening? Was it still happening? I began my own investigation. I discreetly checked her phone when she left it charging. I looked at her credit card statements. I drove through her office parking lot on Thursdays, confirming the car was actually there. It was one Saturday, while Nicole was at the beauty salon, that I found what I was looking for. She had forgotten to log out of her email on her tablet. There was a folder called Personal Projects that caught my eye. Nicole had no personal projects. All her work was for the firm. I opened the folder with my heart racing. They were emails exchanged with someone named James. The messages were carefully professional, discussing meetings and technical specifications. But there was something between the lines, a disguised intimacy. We need to review those details we discussed at lunch. Thursday's presentation was perfect, as always. Your feedback is always valuable to me. James. I searched the name online, coming across Nicole's company. James Taylor, project manager, divorced, 42 years old. The photo showed a well-groomed man, the kind who probably wears expensive perfume and drives imported cars. The anger I felt was different from the first. It was no longer the shock of discovery, but a cold, calculated fury. Nicole was having an affair with the department head. How cliché, I thought bitterly. That night, over dinner, I decided to play my own game. You know, I've been thinking, I began casually. Maybe we should take that trip we've always planned. Paris? Rome, maybe? Nicole's eyes lit up with hope. Really? You always said it was too expensive. Life's too short to keep putting off dreams. We can see this as a new beginning for us. She held my hand across the table, tears in her eyes. I would love that. We need that. I smiled, squeezing her hand back. Inside, I was already planning my next move. In the weeks that followed, we made preparations for the trip. Nicole was radiant, more affectionate than she had been in years. We chose hotels, planned itineraries, bought new clothes. It was almost like old times, except for the weight of secrecy between us. 3 days before the trip, I sent an anonymous email to James Taylor. I attached a photo of the perfume bottle and simply wrote, "Your next conquest found out. Be careful what you leave in married women's cars." Her husband filled her perfume with vinegar and she embarrassed herself in front of clients. P.S. Enjoy your last weeks at the company. I also sent an anonymous email to Nicole's company's HR department, mentioning rumors of an inappropriate relationship between a manager and a subordinate, suggesting they investigate the situation to avoid harassment lawsuits. The next day, Nicole came home pale and shaken. "What happened?" I asked, feigning concern. "James, the project manager. He resigned today, out of the blue, and HR is investigating inappropriate behavior in the department." Wow, that's strange. You used to work with him, didn't you? Sometimes, she replied vaguely, avoiding my gaze. The trip to Europe never happened. 2 days later, I found Nicole crying in her room, cell phone in hand. What happened? I asked, sitting next to her. I need to tell you something. And then she confessed. Through tears and sobs, she told me about James, about the lunches that turned into dinners, about how she felt valued and wanted after so long. She said she had ended everything when the perfume incident happened, realizing how much she was risking. I listened in silence. When she finished, I got up and went to the window. You know I switched the perfume for vinegar? Nicole was shocked. What? How? I found the bottle in your car. I knew it wasn't mine. It was my little revenge. So you knew all this time? And you didn't say anything? I wanted to see how far you would go with the lie. I wanted to see if you would be able to confess on your own. And James's dismissal? The investigation? Coincidences happen, I replied, shrugging. Nicole stared at me, slowly understanding the extent of what I had done. You destroyed his career. He destroyed my marriage. We destroyed our marriage, she corrected, and for the first time in weeks there was honesty in her voice. We sat in silence for long minutes. The sun set through the window, painting the room with golden hues that seemed far too ironic for the moment. What do we do now? Nicole finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. But I know I can't just forget. I can't pretend nothing happened. I understand. I messed up. We both did. You with the betrayal, me with the revenge. We're no longer the people who fell in love in college. Nicole nodded, wiping away her tears. So that's it? 12 years wasted? Not wasted. Lived. But maybe it's time to admit we've reached the end. The following weeks were practical and melancholic. We divided the assets without much discussion. Nicole kept the apartment. I kept the savings. We signed the divorce papers on a rainy December afternoon, two polite strangers ending a partnership. James Taylor got a job in another city. I learned from a former colleague that he had moved, likely to start over away from the scandals. Nicole stayed at the company but requested a transfer to another branch. I rented a smaller apartment downtown. The first few nights, the loneliness was suffocating. But little by little, I rediscovered who I was beyond that marriage. I returned to reading, something I had abandoned years ago. I joined a gym and started cooking elaborate meals just for myself. 6 months later, I was having coffee in a bookstore when I saw Nicole across the street. She looked different, her hair shorter, her clothes more modern. She was chatting animatedly with a friend, gesturing and laughing. For a moment, our eyes met. She waved discreetly, a sad smile on her lips. I waved back. We didn't speak. We didn't cross the street to exchange polite words. We simply went our separate ways. Two strangers who once shared a life. Sometimes I think about the vinegar perfume bottle. I keep it in a drawer as a peculiar reminder. I'm not entirely proud of the revenge, but I don't regret it either. It was the catalyst we needed to face the truth. Our marriage had ended long before the betrayal. Revenge, I discovered, has a bittersweet taste. Like vinegar. It stings immediately, leaves a bad taste in the mouth, but sometimes it's necessary to cleanse the wounds and move on. The men's perfume in Nicole's car wasn't just evidence of betrayal. It was the symptom of something bigger we both ignored. We had stopped choosing each other every day. Today, 3 years later, I can say I've found my peace. Not in a new relationship, not in a perfect life, but in the acceptance that some stories need to end so others can begin. The vinegar evaporated, the perfume faded, but the lessons remained. Nicole remarried last year. I received the invitation, a strange courtesy that I politely declined. I sent a wedding gift, a set of crystal glasses. No irony, no ulterior motives. Just a gesture of someone who has truly moved on. As for me, I learned that revenge may be satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't heal the wound of betrayal. What heals is time, forgiveness. Not necessarily of the other, but of oneself, and the courage to start over. The bottle is still in the drawer. Sometimes I pick it up, turn it between my fingers, and remember that October afternoon when my life changed. Not with nostalgia, not with anger, but but with the clarity of someone who understands that every ending is also a beginning. The story of the vinegar perfume has become an anecdote I tell to close friends, usually late at night, after a few glasses of wine. They laugh, say it was creative, that Nicole deserved it. I just smile and change the subject. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't the vinegar in the perfume. It was moving forward, rebuilding my life, finding happiness alone. It was proving, especially to myself, that I was more than that marriage, more than that betrayal, more than that revenge. Sometimes life plays tricks on us. It puts us in situations where we discover sides of ourselves we didn't know we were. I discovered I was capable of being vengeful, calculating, cold, but I also discovered I was resilient, capable of forgiving, of starting over. The men's perfume in my wife's car was the beginning of the end, but it was also the end of the beginning. The vinegar was my twisted way of saying goodbye, of closing, a cycle with a gesture that, I admit, was more childish than I'd like to admit. But we all deal with pain in our own ways. Some scream, some cry, some take revenge with small acts of rebellion. I chose vinegar. I could have chosen worse. I could have chosen permanent hatred, eternal bitterness. Instead, I chose a prank that, in the end, revealed more truths than years of marriage had managed. Today, when I smell vinegar in the kitchen, I no longer think of revenge. I think of cleaning, of starting from scratch, of preparing something new. It's ironic how a petty act ended up becoming a symbol of renewal in my life. If I could go back in time, would I do it differently? Maybe. I probably would have confronted Nicole directly, spared James the professional humiliation, ended things more maturely. But that's not how it happened, and that's okay. Because every story has its own rhythm, its own internal logic. Mine included a bottle of perfume, vinegar, and a small revenge that triggered big changes. It's not the story I would choose to tell my future children about overcoming adversity, but it is my story, authentic and imperfect. The marriage ended, the revenge was carried out, the vinegar dried. What remains is life following its course, relentless and full of possibilities. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all. No matter how much we plan our revenge or our lives, time always has the final say. The bottle remains in the drawer, no longer a trophy or a bitter reminder, but a marker of a time when I was forced to face uncomfortable truths and make difficult choices. It's strange how small objects can carry such large stories. Nicole and I created a life together, destroyed it together, and now we live separate lives that occasionally intersect in shared memories. His perfume, my vinegar, our end. A strange equation that resulted in two people more honest with themselves. And so ends the story of the men's perfume in my wife's car. Not with a grand dramatic gesture, not with a miraculous reconciliation, but with the quiet acceptance that some things must break completely before we can build something new from the shards. The vinegar evaporated, but its purpose was fulfilled. It revealed truths, forced change, and taught me that revenge, even when it seems sweet at the time, always leaves a sour taste in the end. But sometimes, that's exactly the taste we need to wake up from a dream that turned into a nightmare. Today, I move forward with my own fragrances, without vinegar, without lies, only with the acidic honesty of someone who has learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the most expensive perfume in the world.